decisions get taken to address the housing crisis and homelessness, that it's done with lived experience at its heart. So today, we're going to be sharing a little bit about our background work in Halton, so that a little bit of a backstory to our project, our work together, some of the lessons and themes that kind of came out of that learning. But then at the heart of the conversation are stories from Helena and Gerald, who have graciously joined us today to share from their own experiences and from what we've been hearing in the community as we engage with folks in different spaces that are experiencing homelessness or precarious housing. And then we'll have a chance to, I love that we're all on round tables kind of peppered about, because I guess that means we can have the small group dialogues, so we can kind of chat together. We've got some questions to kind of lead us forward, to get to know each other a little bit, have some time to collaborate, connect, and reflect on the stories that you've heard here today. So there may even be folks with lived experience in this room, and so even though some of the questions are geared towards maybe folks that haven't experienced homelessness and how they can engage lived experience, I think maybe it's an opportunity for us to come together and to hear from folks and to reflect on what we're leaving from here today. So I think I'll sort of skip through a lot of this, because I don't think it's a terribly big surprise to a lot of folks at this point, at least in this room, how we got here. But just to kind of highlight some of the systemic factors that have led to and continue to perpetuate homelessness in our communities. So, the scale back of federal and provincial government support in housing, and the downloading of responsibility onto municipalities who have, despite a lot of great efforts, don't have the same capacity to address the housing crisis, which is so much more systemic. The loss of affordable units to the lack of rent control and vacancy decontrol policies like that are usually controlled by the province. Wages that have not kept up with rates of inflation, but particularly folks living on fixed incomes, OW, ODSP in Ontario, for example, but as well as our seniors and older adults living on pensions. And so, in our work at Community Development Halton, we work a lot with data, and we use a lot of Statistics Canada data, try to understand, who's vulnerable in our communities and why. And it comes back so much to income, oftentimes, especially folks on fixed incomes, in this time of rapid increase in cost of living, in housing and food, all of those things. And then two other pieces that that we're really interested in kind of fleshing out a little bit more are the ways in which, zoning, exclusive zoning in our municipalities and communities impact, their capacity to build more affordable housing or higher density housing. And one of the themes that I've noticed just as a participant here today are the ways in which we might ask, from this conference, how do we go back to our communities and talk to residents of our communities about homelessness? Because we've all heard about NIMBYism and the challenges of, exclusionary neighborhoods and things like that. And so much of it is kind of boils down to a lack of understanding and a lack of humanizing of the issue of homelessness. And so I think that's definitely something worth talking about more as we go, is how we might have these conversations in our communities. So a little bit about Halton context. This is our region. So the latest point in time count has the number of folks that were experiencing homelessness on a given night was approximately 343. However, according to the Community Homelessness Report that was also published by the region, this other report found about approximately 608 individuals, reflecting a 54% increase over a one-year period. And these numbers seem drastically different, and I think this may not be news to a lot of folks in this room, but there is a challenge to connecting with folks and trying to adequately represent, the actual impact of the housing crisis on folks in our communities. And so oftentimes, whatever numbers we do have are probably quite conservative compared to the actual number. And so we thought we would sort of highlight that. And Halton Region also has a very comprehensive 10-year housing strategy. I'm not here to represent it or to go into a lot of detail because I wasn't one of the authors of it, but part of our work with bringing voices of lived experience to decision makers and to policy is in part to help inform the orchestration of the housing strategy as well as our coordinated access system in Halton. Yeah, so really brief summary, looking at root causes, like thinking a lot about root causes and systemic causes of homelessness to try to get away from the individualization of it and kind of putting responsibility on the shoulders of an individual versus a system that may not always humanize us or might present challenges to affordability. So we've got the systemic causes, policy decisions at all three levels of government, housing discrimination based on those income and ability and identity pieces, and getting into what's missing, which is voices of lived experience at the center of our solutions. So I'll briefly share a little bit about our project. So at the heart of our project is our peer researcher team. Gerald and Helena are joining us today. As part of that team, and there are 6 other folks that were not able to join us today. And so we wanted to take a moment to honor those folks and their contributions to our work. And, I'll kind of survey some of the activities that we've been up to in our region to connect with voices of lived experience. And so as a peer team, we really began by exploring, from a strength-based approach, like where are our passions and what are our strengths together, and what kinds of pieces can we get involved in both to connect with folks experiencing homelessness and to advocate for change. And so that work has involved a number of different things, from engaging a total of 140 people to date that have direct lived experience and are currently unhoused. And those folks we connected to through a combination of encampment outreach across the region, story sharing circles where we would visit neighborhood centers and also emergency shelter spaces. We've also hosted 2 educational events in the community, one of which you can see some pictures here, and we'll chat a little bit more about that event as we go. And then, reporting on what we're learning in an anonymous way, but reporting back to the community what we're learning, what we're hearing, what voices are sharing with us, and exploring ways that we can take that forward. So this event in particular took place in Burlington at the Central Park and at the Central Branch Library. And ostensibly what we did was it was a walking tour around Central Park by 2 of our peer researchers that Helena will share about, named Kim and Mike. And at the time, they were, and I remember I met them at the library, and they had shared with me that their address was the library, and they were sleeping and staying in the areas kind of around the library. And so over the course of our time meeting together, we talked about what would it look like to bring the community in and engage the community on these very direct lived experiences, and how can we do it in an experiential way so that folks can learn can have a chance to experience, walking a mile in someone else's shoes. And so they had led this walkabout around the Central Park area from the library, and shared stories about their own experiences living in that area, as well as experiences of other folks that they knew. And so they spoke about, somebody they knew that slept in a bus shelter, for example, on the outside of the park, and the ways that, this person got really wet and a little bit sick because they were sleeping there overnight, and there was a big gap between the bottom of the glass of the bus stop and the pavement, and a storm was blowing in, and so the experience of trying to sleep in this space where it's cold and there's water and wind coming in. And of course, the irony was, we were doing this walk on a day where there was kind of intense freezing rain. And so everyone that was participating got a little bit of, I guess, discomfort is maybe the word I would use. People kind of spoke to that, imagine if we had to sleep in this and what that experience would be like. And then we came back inside at the library and kind of talked about what was coming up for folks as they went, because for some people, those experiences weren't terribly surprising, and for others it was. And so I think one of the powerful things to this particular event was a way to really connect with people that were at various ends of understanding when it comes to the human experience of the housing crisis, and but also a chance to meet two folks that could specifically speak to spaces and experiences that they had along this walk. Oh. And I'm just going to briefly share a video which features Gerald here. And Mike and Kim, where we did this video to sort of share a little bit about the work that we're doing, and so I just wanted to share it with you briefly. Oh, okay. Apologies, will just be a second.
Anyone have a joke?
Absolutely. What's a pirate's favorite letter? R? That's wholesome. Okay. I like that.
Want to play this video on Discord?
That's right, yeah. Oh, look at that. Okay. I don't know if there's a way to make it bigger or not, but... Oh, there is.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. You're a lifesaver.
45 years of working hard every day of my life, and it literally happened in one day. Everything gone.
Being homeless, it all started through an eviction. Basically, I just knew what was coming up. So I decided, okay, time to do some homework. My idea was to make myself as invisible as possible. And I was pretty successful at it.
Meeting Stephen, it gave me the chance to tell my experience of homelessness, and he introduces me to other people, I guess, in the same situation that I was in.
The goal of the whole thing is to let people know what's going on out there, pretty much. And the goal, I would say, is to familiarize people with the problem of like housing and the encampments and homelessness.
We call it research, but really it's kind of consulting based on their own experience. And so it's a way of recognizing experience as a form of expertise. Experiences that speak to real systemic cracks.
We meet on a regular basis, and sometimes we'll like have little group discussions about what's new and everything else that's happening out there. It helps quite a bit. It builds morale. It really does.
The bread and butter of it all is, really to find ways of bringing voice of lived experience to decision makers and informing policy. What it means to bring voices of lived experience to decision makers, that's where the peer team comes in.
I've gone out to encampments to hand out, some socks and clothes and some food and that. I think they feel like there's no hope. This is why I want to be there, because I want to show children that there is hope. That's the only thing that kept me going every day. was knowing that tomorrow has to be a better day. But I'm meeting new friends, and I'm hearing their stories, and they're hearing mine, and we're trying to get the government to listen to us, to build more shelters, more housing.
Houses are for people to live in, not commodities to be traded like baseball cards or hockey cards, and it seems to be that way.
Today, I mean, there's people who actually work all week long but still have to rely on the food bank. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Voices in the community are saying, here are the gaps. Here's what you're getting right. Here's what you're missing out on. And here's what people are saying that they need. And all of that is informed by our peer research team. My hope would be that we have a firm peer table and presence in Halton to continue that work.
I don't want to see it happening to anybody. And some of the days are so cold that it breaks my heart. I just don't know how people can do it. There's no reason why this should even be happening.
It's always hard to be composed in these kind of situations. I thought, okay. So I think one of the key learnings, just speaking for myself around, around this work and what it is that I understand that we're doing, is really looking beyond the numbers. Numbers are important, they're data, we all work with data, but stories are also data, and they're also relational and integral to belonging, which is something that we all really need, not least of all in the midst of a housing crisis. So, what's not reflected in statistics? That human experience with homelessness, the ways that we move forward together, story building from crisis, community and resilience, building relationships of trust alongside data. So I guess it's coming back to that idea that, in order to, in the previous slide, we were talking about how, we connected with 140 people that were experiencing homelessness, or we had these events in the community where we talked about these things, or we did this activity. But at the end of the day, what makes the meaning out of that work is the human connection that comes from it. Sometimes when we go to spaces, like recently we went to a shelter, a family shelter, and somebody shared with us that I hadn't fully appreciated until I heard it, and I've heard it now a few times, is the meaning and value of intentionally coming together to have that story sharing circle, or just that space to connect, just that little bit of intentional community. Like, all we do is bring coffee, pizza, or donuts, whatever the case is, and we just sit down, and sometimes people share with us what's coming up for them in the day. Sometimes they'll talk more about, broader challenges or gaps or issues in their lives, or with the system, if they have opinions about that. Or even what's working and what we can continue to build on. Because I think, I've heard in a few sessions today, the ways that, we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. It's sometimes as simple as connecting with people and hearing their story and finding ways to work, to collaborate together. So, we're always looking for opportunities to further embed ourselves within the communities that we work within and support. And ways that we can inform policy from what we're hearing on an active basis in spaces where we connect with folks with lived experience. And, one of the key kind of conversation pieces to explore are the roles that organizations, individuals, and people with lived experience have in driving that change. I think, if we've learned anything, it's that this will take an all-of-community approach. And so I think we have an opportunity to really explore what those roles look like. And here are just some very high level, I wish we could go into more detail, but what we've been hearing in the community over the past year and a half or so. So, you know, thinking in terms of what we can do in the immediate term, humanizing language has been really key. So, I mean, my background's in history, and one of the things that I've noticed in social history that kind of continues today is the way that we can create sort of like a dichotomy of language where we say, okay, these folks are citizens and these are unhoused folks, or you know, we kind of divide people based on certain criteria, and that creates dehumanization. When really, instead of saying, you know, even housed and unhoused residents, we might say, you know, here are folks that are deeply impacted by a housing crisis, that have these experiences that are really difficult and challenging, and you know, how can we come together as a community, because that doesn't need to be the case. Looking at medium to longer term, so you know, one of the pieces we hear more and more, and I've been really, I think it's been really inspiring to hear how many conversations at this conference have been happening around coordinated access, and we work closely with the coordinated access system in our region, because that system navigation piece is so key. Like, what do people do when they suddenly find themselves without a roof, and based on what led them there? I mean, and I think sometimes for a lot of us that haven't had those experiences, we often have a hard time putting ourselves in that position, to even imagine, like, what would I do tomorrow if suddenly I was without shelter? You know, so really thinking about how we can support our neighbors in the community around navigating those systems and services, and how we can ensure that we're meeting people with the right support at the right time. And as a team, like, we really advocate for peer work in that endeavor. And on that note, looking at the need for a supported structure for peer support and co-design in our programs, policies, and procedures. And I think this probably could go beyond housing, because when we talk about housing, as many of us know, we're also speaking to food security, to exclusion, to trauma and discrimination, and all of these other pieces that people experience as a part of the experience of being unhoused. And so what does it look like to build in that peer support and co-design in the way that we respond, is one of the main questions that we ask. And one of the, I guess we'll also highlight the key gaps across the board that folks highlighted were the capacity for pets and for somebody's spouse or partner to join them in the shelter spaces. Often shelters don't always have capacity or the ability to welcome people's pets or partners, but those are major barriers to accessing service for a lot of folks that we've connected with. Navigating large systems, which even for those of us working within those systems, like, it can feel really kind of like a behemoth and very challenging to navigate. And so, you know, really thinking through, like, you know, how can we make this accessible for ourselves and for the people that we're supporting or walking alongside. And, you know, I think we also talk about those transition periods. So what happens to folks that are, you know, exiting healthcare, correctional facilities, or child welfare systems, or even relationship breakdowns? You know, how does that fit into how a person finds themselves without a home and the way that they suddenly have to navigate our systems? Really briefly, the three major goals of our work is to, first and foremost, empower folks with lived experience in whatever ways that we can. And we've been doing that by having these story sharing circles and providing opportunities for people to have their voice heard and not judged, and in community with others. So sometimes when we go into a shelter space, for example, you know, just the nature of how siloed our everyday existence is, often in our work and the way we live, and oftentimes people staying in shelter, or maybe less so in encampments, but what we've been finding is a lot of folks don't even get a chance to speak to each other in those spaces. And so when we have story circles, people get a chance to meet their neighbors in that shelter, and some amazing things come out of that. I remember one story where it was the family shelter, and there were some folks that had young kids, but they had no option for childcare for when their kids came home from school, to make sure that their kids were safe, and back at the family shelter, while the parents were looking for work or accessing something that they needed, or whatever the case may be. And so there were fellow folks staying at the shelter that came up and said, hey, I also have young kids. They go to the same school, and they discovered that in that conversation. And out of that came mutual support around childcare, which wouldn't have happened otherwise if we hadn't just come together intentionally and got to know each other. And so there's a lot of gifts and strength within individuals and within communities, and I think we're always learning on how to kind of tap into that and help others discover that for themselves. The second goal is to inform community partners in Halton on the experiences of service use and of just the human experience of homelessness, or those that are at risk of homelessness in our communities, to help support those local services. We're not a program in our work. We do participatory action research, but if anybody's not familiar with that, we essentially hear stories, build community, and then try to drive action based on those stories in a collaborative way. And then 3, engaging and equipping Halton residents or members of our communities to have conversations about homelessness with and some of the solutions and some of the gaps and issues that lead us here, and invite people to become part of actionable change. And so I think these 3 things are very cyclical and very interwoven in our work, and they're mutually reinforcing. And so as we're actively hearing from folks in encampments, in shelter spaces, in neighborhood centers, we're learning about the shifting and changing nature of homelessness in our community, which, I mean, as many of us know, just in the last few years alone, has grown exponentially, and some of the challenges people face have changed over time. And so we're always hearing about that and learning how to adapt to it in collaboration with our partners in the community. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking. I think I'd like to welcome Helena to share some very key points. I've highlighted some point form up here, but I think Helena's voice is far more important than these point form notes. And we've also got some photos to share that we'll introduce in a moment. But
Gerald's going first.
Gerald, like to go first?
Yes.
Okay.
No, that's okay. You go first.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we're actually going to switch this around a wee bit. So apologies for going through the pictures here. Okay. So Gerald and I met almost 2 years ago now, I think. And I remember we had coffee in a Tim Hortons, and Gerald shared his story with me very generously and graciously, and we've been working to connect with folks in the community ever since. So I'd like to give the floor to Gerald to share a little bit about his story, about what we've been hearing in the community, maybe we'll kind of learn something new. And so thank you, Gerald. We'll hop over to you.
Okay.
They're all on.
You're all right. Thank you. You're my first audience, so you'll have to be patient. But going what Stephen said, I actually answered an ad through Food for Life. And it was Stephen who sent the invitation out for lived experience. So he was going around and listening to stories, I guess. So for myself, like the video said, I worked for years and years and years. I was in heavy construction. Came to the point where I couldn't work anymore. Only problem with that was it took me about three plus years fighting ODSP to get on that benefit. But as one thing came, there was more, so then there was like a separation, and I had someone who was taking care of me, and they decided one day, and like that said, it took one day, and I was dropped off at a Tim Hortons, and was told someone was going to come back and pick me up in like an hour. That was like at 11 o'clock in the morning. And by midnight, I'm still sitting at a Tim Hortons. So anyhow, a great group in Acton called Link for Care. They actually called up a shelter. They got me that day into a shelter. Of course, this whole thing that was going on in like one day was quite a shock. So, I mean, I was used to having homes and cars. I mean, when I talk to some people, you know, and I say, well, what do you think homeless is? And they basically think, well, you know, they don't want to work, it's booze, it's drugs. And I think there's quite a few people that were in my boat where you worked hard, you had everything in life, and it just takes one day for a disaster. And I ended up in the system, and I actually was in the shelter for two years, and a transitional home for about two more years. And because the lifestyle I came from, I wanted to crawl right back out and get to where I was. So while in the shelter, I took advantage of everything. I had Links for Care help me do hatch. I had Halton Legal help me with my ODSP. And because I was disabled, I guess I got a bit of a priority list. So thankfully now I got my own place again. Got my independence back, thank you. And I got a great group here that we constantly, 3-4 times a week, we meet up, and we do good things in the community. But I'm really thankful for, I mean, as much as homelessness is no good for anybody, there is a lot of good services within it. And if it wasn't for that, I worked hard. It took me like five years of working day in and day out of getting myself back to being on my own again. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically it from the start to the end, but I'm appreciative of all the services and all the new friends I've met, and I'm just looking to pay it back, right? So, or as they would say, maybe pay it forward, but giving back to the community now is my main goal. So, I'd like to thank you all.
Am I good? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Helena. I'm really grateful to be here. I want to start by saying I'm pretty nervous, so I just want to get that out there. I also want to thank our moderator, and I'm really impressed today by the translator and the interpreter services, so I want to give them a shout out as well, because everyone's doing great work here today. And, you know, I probably wouldn't have thought about that a couple of years ago. I'm from a corporate background, and I would have everything very perfect when I came to these type of settings, right? I would have everything just as it needed to be, and I would perform when I was up here at different conferences, because that's the mindset that I was in. But, you know, things happen in life, and I'm really grateful for being here today. I'm really grateful for how many lived experience, or people with lived experience that are here. I do want to make a point of saying that we had applied for the bursary, and we weren't accepted. But it's really wonderful to know that so many people have lived experiences, are here, and that the bursaries were taken by people as well that are just as deserving as we are. Our entire team couldn't be here this year, but hopefully next year, you know, maybe we'll apply again for a bursary or we'll have some more funding. But part of what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about myself, but also I wanted to bring the voices of our peer researchers that aren't here with us today. A couple of them you may have seen on that video, Kim and Mike, and I'll talk to them in a minute. But one of our other peer researchers, her name is Maria. She's 58 years old. She's the same age as I am. I met Maria just recently. I think I was the last peer researcher to come to the team. I as well use a food program, and Food for Life it's called, in Burlington. And Stephen had sent out an email looking for people with lived experience, and I thought, you know what, this isn't something I would have done a couple years ago, because I wouldn't have been vulnerable enough to be able to actually use my voice in such a manner. But I sent an email, and I was brought onto the team. And like I said, I'm really grateful for that. So one of the ladies that I met this year, and it's only been this year, her name is Maria. Like I said, she's 58. And I met Maria. She was living in her car with her companion animal, a little dog. And the difficulty, of course, for people that have companion animals, and I was in animal rescue for about 18 years, is that you're forced to make a choice between something that you really love and care about, which is actually the one thing that is probably keeping you going. Because at that point, self-care, and sometimes, and I can speak from my own experience, is that you really just you believe you don't deserve to exist any longer, right? And when you believe you don't deserve to exist any longer, and all the hope starts to go out of your life, that erosion of hope is devastating. So when I met Maria, like I said, she was living in her car, and we had a really wicked summer this year in Halton. I don't know what it was like here, but it was up into the 40s. And to be in a car with her companion animal, because she would have had to make the choice to get rid of that companion animal, the one thing that was actually keeping her going every day, it was devastating for me. And it's not even me and my experience going through it. So I wanted to bring her story a little bit to the group, because like I said, I want to honor those voices. The wonderful thing is that Maria is not housed yet, but she is in a motel where they do allow pets or companion animals. And I like to think of them more as companion animals other than pets, because I think sometimes it's very easy for people in the system to judge and say, well, if you really want to be housed, then it's not even a choice. You just give your animal away. You make sure that it's just you. And obviously, that doesn't work for a lot of people, because that is the one thing, that is their connection. That is the one thing that's keeping them going every day when they wake up. So I wanted to acknowledge that Maria is not here with us, but she's doing better, and she's also on her way. And she's a really valuable member of our team, and I'm really grateful and inspired by her that I've met her this year, as I am by Gerald as well. And Mike and Kimberly, who are in the video. It's a really fascinating and really beautiful story. And I also want to just take a moment as well to thank all of you for being here. I wanted to do that up front, but I forgot, and I'm looking at my notes. You had other places you could be today, right? It's the end of the day. People are tired. And I'm really grateful that you all decided to spend it with us. So a little late for me saying that, but I just wanted to get that out there. So Mike and Kimberly, I met them at that walk that Stephen talked about. Now, it was really interesting in my mind what was going through, because it was a really cold, blustery, rainy day that day. And there was some little bit of ice rain and pellets. I don't like the cold, especially as I'm getting older. I'm very negatively impacted by the cold. At any time, like I've got my jacket on now, and it's probably not even really cold in here. But I met them that day, and it was actually their event that they were putting on. So imagine that there's individuals who have been on the streets for a couple of years. They meet Stephen, they become part of this team, And they've gone from being supported to now they're able to support others, even though both of these individuals at that point, I don't believe they were actually housed when I first met them. Right? So because the support was given and they were treated as human beings and they weren't continually dehumanized by the system and the people in the system, they were able to actually put on their own event at the library, which is really incredible. I'm an event planner myself in my past. So for someone to be able to come and make to be that vulnerable in a group of people that you don't know. And when I showed up for the walk that day, I had told myself in my mind that I didn't actually want to go for the walk. I was going to do the library part inside, and then I was going to bow out gracefully and just say, oh, you know, I don't have an umbrella. I was trying to think of excuses that I didn't actually have to go on the walk, because I have never myself actually been homeless. I've been precariously housed all of my life, which I'll speak to about in a minute. But sometimes situations and lived experiences of other people are so real, it can almost act as a barrier, that fear that I felt within myself that day to want to be even further vulnerable and to actually know what their experience was. It's very easy to continue to dehumanize people when you're not actually listening to people and you're not putting yourself in positions where you can somewhat experience what they're experiencing through their stories. So that day, instead of leaving, which I had intended to do, I was wet with everybody else outside, and I went on that walk with them. And when I got back to the library and we were talking, I was really surprised. I'm going to get pretty emotional. I was really surprised by how emotional I was, and I still carry that with me, because I thought of myself in those situations, and I'm going to show some pictures in just a minute of where Mike in particular would shelter in and around the library. And as I was watching and listening to Mike and Kimberly talk about their story, I was feeling all of this. Now, I'm from a trauma background, so I used to be pretty shut down, and everything was really repressed. So I didn't do a lot of feeling. I did a lot of thinking of my feelings, not feeling my feelings. So meeting Mike and Kimberly and going on this walk, I was starting to really feel stuff that day, and it was percolating and bubbling. When I got back to the library, I was really overwhelmed with my own situation and thinking how close I have come most of my life to actually being on the streets, to being unhoused, to being homeless. And that really hit me really hard, because I thought, you know, I could very well perish out here at my age, being the kind of person that I don't take to the cold well anyways, and just being isolated and alone and not having that support. I could really see my situation if it ever happened to me where I was actually, I was on the street. I didn't know if I would be able to survive. And so I let Mike and Kimberly know after that event just how much they had inspired me, because they do every day, just like Gerald does. And I wanted to, if you wouldn't mind, Stephen, I'll just show a couple pictures, actually, of in and around the library. And that central library has become a pivotal place for us and a peer research team. So, and I only found this out 2 Wednesdays ago. So we were having a weekly meeting, and Mike and Kimberly left, and they said, would you like to come and see where we sheltered here at the library? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So they took me around the back, and they showed me that corner, just those doors in the corner on the left there. And you know, it looks lovely, right? I mean, it's a library, it's wooded, it's fantastic, it's bright, you know, it looks like it would be a lovely place to visit, but not a lovely place to try to live. And so if you can just zoom in, I took a couple of them actually, because from a distance you can't really tell. There's a couple more pictures, Stephen. Yeah, so it's not even a rectangle, it's just a triangle there in the corner. And they both sheltered there, right? And there are blinds on the library windows, and they were so grateful to the people that worked at the library, because they became friends with them, that the people at the library would pull the blinds down because they had their own staff room, and they wanted to give Mike and Kimberly some privacy. And I thought that was really wonderful, because there are people that would close those blinds because they didn't want to see Mike and Kimberly, right? But the difference here was that they were actually working with them, and they were trying to do their best that they could. So the wonderful thing is, after that walk, I'm getting to know Mike and Kimberly more this year. I had a conversation, and there's a couple more pictures. So this is where Mike in particular lived for quite some time, in under those stairs. And then there's a couple other pictures that gets closer. And then around the other, that's what it looks like. Now, Mike would say to me, that was a prime spot, right? People are vying to actually live under stairs near the library, because when the library opens in the morning, they know their services are there. They know the people in the library are not going to treat them like garbage. They're going to be able to go in and start their day. The pictures that further on from this, I just took these pictures just a couple days ago before I came here. Those are someone's belongings. So this is another set of stairs on the other side of that building, and it's such an amazing building, it's actually a bandstand. So there's all of this life and activity going on around, and people are coming and going, and they're living their lives. And then we have people in the community who are trying to make themselves as invisible as possible underneath a set of stairs, right? I mean, I was hearing that and taking that in. The great thing is, Mike and Kimberly came together. They didn't know each other at first. When they first came together at the library, that's how they met. Then they both met Stephen. They have remained close. Kimberly, I had a conversation with her on the weekend, and she let me know that when her and Mike first met, they were just sort of buddies, right? They got to know each other, but they really didn't. They hung out during the day, but they really didn't, do too much other than that. And then they decided that they were going to become their support system, and then they decided that they were going to keep each other safe, because especially male to female, right, it can be difficult. Kimberly happens to be Indigenous, so there's a lot of other things going on as well. And they are now, I'm happy to say, they just got their own apartment. And they just texted Stephen a little while ago and said, we don't have internet yet. And what else did they? They didn't have internet.
Or cable.
Or cable.
I literally got the text as I sat down to present, so it's in real time.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful thing, right? So coming together, forming a system of safety out of necessity, and now actually growing in bonds of connection, having a place together now, and my understanding is they're in a relationship. So that's not to say that everything happens for a reason, because I'm not going to placate anybody and sit up here and say, well, isn't that wonderful? That's the moral and that's the outcome, right? All things happen for a reason, and they found each other and it all worked out. They worked really hard, right? They have struggled and they have fought and they have, tried to ensure that people see them as human beings first, and that they shouldn't just be the kind of people that should just go off and not exist somewhere. So I wanted to bring those voices with us because they're not able to be here. And I think it's really important because this is what we're talking about today with lived experience. So again, they went from being supported to being able to be supportive. Now my story is a little bit different. I'm not going to take too long to talk about it, but I've been precariously housed most of my life. So I was born into domestic violence. So my mother at the time, because it was her husband, she became a single parent. So single parent with 2 kids back in the 60s, right? It's already societal stuff. So we were already, when I was born, we were already on the run from place to place to place. So by the time I was 12, I've lived in 12 different places. I ended up as in the foster care system as a Crown Ward. By the time I was 30, I'd lived in 21 different places. I'm not an army brat. I didn't get to travel the world and live in wonderful places. My housing has been so precarious because it started from the actual day that I was born. We were running to the next situation. So whilst I've been lucky in the sense that I have always had a roof over my head, I think the crisis of homelessness is that there's that precarious housing right in the middle. Many of us are just a paycheck or two. Or, as Gerald, something happens where you're supposed to be taken care of and somebody's manipulating you. Or there's so many different stories out there, and it just happens, right? So my message today is that, precarious homelessness is like the tip of, there's an iceberg. And the people that we can actually see at that tip of the iceberg, that's growing exponentially. And that's really quite disgusting in 2025, right? With the wealth and the resources we have in this country. That we would let anybody not only not have a shelter or a roof of their choice, but still in our province of Ontario, there's not clean drinking water. I mean, these things are criminal. I think of them now as being criminal, and I have tried to be in the system, fighting the system, and now with peer research and lived experience, I realize this is where the strength is. It's not that there's not great things happening in other areas, but this has been the link and this has been the vital piece that we don't have, is actually sitting down and listening to people's stories and listening to where they came from and understanding and being able to put ourselves in their situations. So for me, it was a lifetime of being precariously housed, unstable, unaffordable. Over a lifetime, that just wears on a person. So very quickly, I'm just going to tell one little bit more before I send it back to Stephen. So the situation with me when I was younger, my biological brother, we sort of took divergent paths because we both went into care and we got separated. So that's the first thing. They didn't keep us together, right? They took a brother and a sister and they separated them. And that's our child protection or family services, right? So we have a huge problem. And I was in a youth homelessness session today, and they were talking about how many people come out of the child care or the foster care system, and they end up, because a lot of them would rather be homeless by the time they're 14 and 15 than to stay where they're living. And so that's, again, I still think that's criminal in 2025, that the situation's not improving, it's actually getting worse, right? I had hoped that at 58 years of age, I wouldn't hear situations of children who are in care needing to live on the streets because they would prefer that. So my brother and I, basically, I went off in one direction of being precariously housed and always sort of stumbling into having a roof over my head, but it was never one of my own making quite often. And my brother, by the time he was 13, because of family trauma, was getting into alcohol as a way to cope. By the time he was a teenager, his schizophrenia had started to emerge. He was unhoused in treatment centers from the time he was probably 17 until the time he was 31. So many of those times in and out of treatment centers on the streets in Ontario and Alberta and BC, close to not making it, not living. But he was lucky enough to find a great place with wraparound services that actually saw him as a human being and not the problem that needed to be solved. Because as we know, many clinicians, they just look at their DSM-5 or they look at what they were taught in school and they're like, you need to fix yourself by doing this, 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 and this. So my brother got eventually after that horrific experience that he went through for 17, 18 years of his life, he found something stable. Myself, I have always been stumbling from one home to another, and I've taken my child with me. So now it's become intergenerational. My mother doing that with me and my brother, and then me being precariously housed. It's almost like you learn how to be precariously housed. I know it sounds really weird, but it's what you know. It's almost like a programming, right? It's in your system. And until I started working with the peer research team, I didn't understand what was really happening. I didn't understand that I was just going along because society says that you need to do this, 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 and this, and be this, 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 and this. So for myself, being precariously housed, I've only just come in the last year to find my own place where I'm actually now starting to feel comfortable and safe, and I feel like I can thrive because I've been in survival mode my entire life, whereas my brother was in survival mode for that part of his life, and when he found the right services, he is actually, when I talk to him now on Zoom, we've just started to get back to having a relationship, and when I hear about his story and what he went through, and I see the difference between the two of us, it's not either or. There's many, many different stories of homelessness, unhoused, precarious housing, dominoes that fall, and you're in situations that are crisis situations for you. And so I'm just gonna, I know I've been talking for a little while, so I'm just gonna end here by saying that even though we both took different paths, it took me until a year ago until I actually felt stable, that I could start to think about thriving versus just surviving. And my brother has actually been in a stable situation for 33 years now. So that goes to show that you need the systems, and you need the people, and you need the connection. Because it was the connection of the people that saw my brother and said, you know what, you're unwell, right? Your alcoholism, your this, your that, your drugs is all a result of something else, and you're unwell, and we need to support you. And we need to wrap around, and we need to give that to you and meet you where you're at. And so I realized that I can't solve homelessness. I said to Stephen just the other day, if I had all the money in the world, and I could give everyone a home, it still wouldn't solve, we would have shelter, but we'd still have other crises because we're not dealing with human beings as a full, integrated, whole human. We're just judging and shaming, and we see it in every shelter we go to. We see it, just the workers, and it's just so demoralizing. So what I'm here and what my focus in as we move forward with the peer research team is person first, human first. We can label, we can categorize, but as long as we're seeing each other as a human being first, then that can melt away so much of the other garbage that we have to weed through and all of these like systems of oppression that we have to navigate and jump through all these hoops. So, yeah, thank you. I went on a little bit, but I appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Helena and Gerald. I just want to honor the fact that it's really not easy to be that vulnerable. And I haven't had lived experience. Somebody I love is unhoused right now, and for me to talk about that in any capacity, I don't think I would be able to, let alone speak to my own experiences. So we could give one more round of applause. I just, in the spirit of honoring the other peer researchers that make up our team or our crew, as Gerald came up with once, here are some quotes. Like, we did a little bit of a brainstorming session over the last few weeks just to kind of highlight what some key messages we'd want to share would be at the conference. And I'll just kind of go through them here. So, stories are about saving each other through our experiences. So when we talk about stories as data, they're also much, much more than that. They're deeply relational. It's how we form belonging with each other. Thinking about what happened to us and the ways that we take it in, the ways that trauma is embodied and our experiences we carry with us into the future and in the present moment. This one really, I had to sit with this one for a while, but there's no life that goes by a book, and there's no book that describes a life. Yeah, I'm still mulling that one over. Everything is on a spectrum. So, things aren't always binary, black and white. We all fall on a spectrum of some kind in our beautiful diversity that is the human experience. We all need to be in the same kayak going down the stream. So thinking through what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like to be going in the same direction together and exploring ways to make that happen. And then coming back to the idea of understanding what it means to walk a mile in someone's shoes. And that there is sort of the focus of a lot of our ongoing planning of community engagement and doing events in the community like the library event, where people have a chance to kind of work through some of these experiences that people have shared, or to walk alongside, maybe is the better way to describe it. And this is a found phrase poem. This actually came from some of the earliest outreach efforts that we did, and they came out of story sharing circles, and they're all anonymous. I can't say the other. Out of the conversations, a found phrase poem just involves, piecing together and curating, some sort of sequence of messages out of the story shared. So, what does the journey in and out of homelessness look like? What do we understand or know about these experiences? There are human beings experiencing struggles. There's a lot of hard work that goes into surviving. Once you're in it, being unhoused, it's hard to get out. Change is uncomfortable, but comfort can trap you. It just takes one bad apple to ruin it for the rest of us. No one wants us around because of the stigma, no matter what kind of help we're getting. We need housing, food, mental health support, legal support, and people who care. what things do I need to do for myself, and what can the community do to help? So I think we only have a few minutes left. 20 minutes? Okay. So I'm wondering if I could, this is an invitation, but I'm wondering, because we're in these beautifully sort of round tables all over, I'm wondering if we could kind of just take a chance to an opportunity to connect with each other. And I've got some questions for discussion, but really just, focused around, if you're already engaging lived experience in the work that you're doing or in your advocacy, whatever that looks like, what does that look like? Because I think, there's so many beautiful models that we can continue to build on and learn from with each other. And none of us alone has answers to how to do this work, but together we can put something really amazing together. But more generally, now that you've heard some of these stories, what's coming up for you? What is it? Is anything surprising? Is it perhaps not surprising? What do you want others to know from what you've heard today, just at this session and the conference more broadly? What has today done for you? So I'm wondering if we could take a few minutes just to connect with each other if we don't already know each other, and maybe to kind of have a little bit of a dialogue about including lived experience in our work. And we as a team, if we're comfortable, we'll just sort of come and just check in and connect with people on a little bit of a smaller, more intimate basis. It'll give folks a chance to maybe ask some questions of us if you'd like, in sort of a smaller way. When we're after a few minutes, we'll come back together as a big group and say our goodbyes as we go off to the rest of our evening. We'll take a moment and get to know each other a little bit, and before we wrap up.